Welcome to the cert-manager biweekly community meeting. Today is the 26th of January, 2022. Today's agenda includes release 1.7, which we're in the process of doing right now. We also are going to talk a bit about Algolia and then some upcoming features in 1.8, followed by triage party, if we have time for that. So, are we ready to talk about release 1.7, or should we save that for whenever it finishes?
Well, it's the release is ready to go. I've completed the release process, but the GitHub release is still, I've left it as a draft release. And the reason I've done that is because we've got two patch releases which we want to publish first, so that the releases appear in the correct order in the GitHub releases page. And we're just waiting for the patch release of 1.5.5 to complete before we publish everything.
All right. In that case, or Mael, did you want to say something?
Yeah. No. Just I'm on the 1.5 release right now, so that should be done in 30 minutes.
All right. So let's go back to release 1.7 a bit later. So the Algolia config discussion. I think that was you, Ashley.
I didn't add it to the doc, actually. I don't know who did. I mean, I can talk about it, I can discuss it, but it wasn't me.
I added it just because I thought it would be, it's to do with a public website and just to capture the discussion that we had a bit earlier.
I can summarize that discussion we had off the recording. So we, the website uses Algolia for its search config, and the way we do that is through their sort of open source docs thing, which they call doc search. I don't think anybody knew about this or updating this, and it's not been updated since cert-manager 0.15. So there's a lot of missing versions in there, and it seems in the meantime, since the last time we changed the config for it, they've changed how they handle config updates, and we don't know where we stand with it. So I've asked, I tried to raise a PR to update the config, which was closed with no further explanation. I'm going to chase down them and see if I can get any information off them about what we need to do to update our config. Failing that, James Munley is probably the most likely person to have access to any of this. They said an email should have gone out, so it may well have been him that received something, or maybe he wouldn't have even known that he received it. So maybe we can get things resent, and then I guess ideally change it so that if there's an email address on our account, and if we need an account to do this, then that email address would be the cert-manager maintainers public Google group rather than an individual. But it may not even be an individual that has it. I don't really know anything about it, and I'm still investigating. There's not really a huge amount to say about it, I don't think, other than we should update it when we do a release. But now, at the moment, we don't even know how to update it. So we'll work it out.
All right, so I think that's a thing to add then to the making a release checklist.
It's in there. It's in there. Yeah, I added it in a PR, but what I wrote is now wrong because I assumed that what I was doing would work, and it didn't work. So when we know how to actually make it work, I'll update it again.
All right, that sounds good. Cool. Any questions on that topic? All right. Let's talk a bit about what will go into 1.8. And I think the first thing there is Irby and the exponential backoff.
Yeah, I think like for that there's like a design already. I think I linked it in the doc. Mostly we already talked about this a little bit in, I think, in the previous meeting. This is implementing exponential backoff for like failed certificate issuances that at the moment are retried every hour, every 1 hour, so like and forever. And instead of that, in order to kind of like reduce the strain on like external services, and also like in case of kind of long-lasting failures, to reduce the possibility that rate limits for individual users would be kind of hit quite quickly. We thought it would be good to like back off exponentially with like increasing time periods. At the moment, the design assumes that it's kind of like going to be like binary exponential back off. So it's like 1 hour, then 2 hours, then 4, 8, 16, up to 32, at which point it just stays at 32. And it gets reset once there is a successful issuance. So like, yeah, I think like there have been a couple of reviews on that PR, and it seems quite straightforward. I guess it would be interesting to hear maybe also from users whether there are any possible, edge cases where you might want to somehow, I don't know, treat it differently. Like at the moment, the assumption is that the only way how to reset it is like successful issuance, and it shouldn't change any existing behavior. Like you can still trigger immediate retry with CMCTL renew, and like things like changing certificate specs, still changing things like DNS names and certificate spec and things like that also trigger like immediate retry, but they don't reset the backup period.
One thing that came up this week, I was talking to Hussein, who's working with a client of JetStacks, who's using the Benify issuer, and his complaint was that it does take at least an hour for a certificate to be retried if there's a failure. I don't think I realized that. I thought I sort of knew that there was, I think I assumed that was only happening for Let's Encrypt issuers. My question then is, would it be possible to tweak this on a per issuer basis?
I mean, one thing is that initially I was actually thinking that like the initial period could be shorter than 1 hour. The reason why it is 1 hour was because it was suggested to be good to keep the existing behavior. I don't know if there is any such, like for example, for which issuers would you want, like for which issuers is there like a clear frame where you can say that for these issuers it can always be short and there's no risk? And
perhaps these cases more, perhaps there's a more specific description of the case. It's like, I think the case is that the user has misconfigured their issuer resource. The certificate renewal comes up, or the certificate issuance comes up, it fails because the issuer is misconfigured. And once the user has corrected the configuration of the issuer, I think they're saying that the certificate still doesn't get cert-manager doesn't attempt to renew the certificate for another hour.
No, because it doesn't know that it doesn't look at issuer configuration. I mean, this backoff is kind of implemented at like a certificate level. So at that point, like it knows what issuer it is. I'm not sure if it would be like that architecturally clean to kind of make it different for different issuers. Like what this does, it just like the backup is applied at the point where you apply issuing condition. I don't know if you would want to conditionally, because there are also things like external issuers, for example. Like we don't really look at issuer at this point. Like it feels like so he doesn't want to manually renew with CMCTL renew. That would be too tedious. Or
well, no. So I've just been thinking more about it. I think it's even more specific. Is the case is that the credential associated with the issuer has expired, and we're waiting. So when the certificate is when cert-manager first attempts to renew the certificate, the issuer credential is invalid. But then some other controller comes along, renews the credential token, at which point the issuer status does get updated. which in turn should trigger the issuer controller in cert-manager to perform its readiness check. And should that trigger cert-manager to reattempt any currently failed certificates associated with that issuer?
So like, should that retry immediately? Like,
And it's
well,
going
at
to
the
be
moment,
important.
yeah.
Like if you have short-lived certificates, what's the shortest certificate lifetime you can have in
1 hour.
cert-manager?
I think it's 1 hour. Is there any? I forgot if there was any constraint on the time. I thought it was 1 hour.
So is it true that
Yeah,
if you're using 1 hour certificates, you could be left in the situation where your certificate, the first attempt fails, and then your certificate on your service is invalid for up to an hour?
Well, in that case, I guess like you are already in a risk. If you are using something such that is likely to fail, it is also likely to fail for more than 1 hour already anyway, I feel like. But yeah, that's not the solution. Jake, you're muted. You're saying something.
Sorry, I just feel like that's a different, like the question of why can we never change old behavior came up last time. I think we've talked about this 1 hour thing before, and because it's way too long in the context of like the really short-lived service mesh certificates that we were wondering if we could use cert-manager for a while ago. So we thought, can we change this to be lower? And then it came back to the point of we can't change previous behavior. So it looks like we're having this discussion again now with the initial back-off period, when you said don't want to change 1 hour because it's the old behavior.
I don't really feel like that would necessarily be breaking. I'm not sure if it's like what would be the actual value in, like would that actually solve some problem, changing it, making it shorter? Okay, like for short-lived certs, like what would it do? Okay, if it had failed once, then I guess it would give it a chance to retry again.
Yeah, because right now it can never fail if your certificate is less than an hour validity, or even an hour validity. One failure is too many.
Yeah, it's a good reason. Are there, in these cases, like, I don't know, I mean, for all our internal projects, I guess this kind of thing uses something like STL-CSR. It would just create certificate requests directly. It doesn't really use certificates. Do people actually use actual certificates for these short-lived scenarios? I guess they do.
They could do.
But has this ever been raised as an issue? Maybe that's why nobody uses it.
Well, yeah, Hussein raised it, not quite the 1 hour certificate, but the frustration from the point of view of a user who is coming to cert-manager fresh, finding that they've misconfigured something and it takes an hour for their corrected configuration to take effect.
But maybe that would be better fixed by like some, as you already said, like some more checks of whether
Perhaps, yeah.
we should retry.
Perhaps if the issuer config. Oh, sorry.
What happens if you delete the certificate resource and recreate it? Would that
That's what everyone has to do. It does that. That's the fix that everyone reaches.
No, but
for.
you can run CMCTL renew then if you're already doing things manually.
If you've got CMCTL, which more people have, but
so like what's like, do we have a good,
if you lowered the like the minimum back off, if you lowered it to 5 minutes or 1 minute, would that instantly break people using Let's Encrypt because you'd overwhelm their API quotas?
well, you could, I mean, like, for example, the user will not fix it within 1 minute. Perhaps they fix the issue within half an hour. Like that's,
by which time the back off has gone up to an hour anyway.
Yeah, and if like I think like the Let's Encrypt, was it like 6 requests for an hour or something like that. So like, is there a great value for users if there are 2 issuances within 1 hour, like so that they can have to quickly like do it within the first half an hour and then it gets retried? Like, is this
For the access token case? Yes, because that gives like 5 minutes for the access token helper to fix the access token. Like the thing I'm talking about, this JetStack helper checks the access token every minute.
But so what happened? So okay, so in his case, he started with a failed issuer. Should that like with an issuer that was basically in a failed state?
No, he's. I'm sorry, that was my first description. That was wrong. I think they started with a correct issuer, and a correct access token, but somewhere down the line, the access token expired. At cert-manager, sometime after the access token had expired, cert-manager tried to renew the certificate and failed, and then never tried again for another hour.
Should we then
hour,
like
the helper had renewed the token?
Should the access tokens maybe like be checked regularly? Should it be the case that it should know if the issuer is in failed state and then not even attempt to reissue the cert? Or
maybe, yeah. There's another bug in the Verify issue. The ready check doesn't actually do a credential. It doesn't actually check the authentication credentials. It checks an endpoint, but that endpoint on the Verify server doesn't require credentials. So that's another bug that needs fixing. But I think the same might apply for like Vault issuer.
but that also then could be solved by maybe like checking the issuer state or status.
I don't remember whether Richard's like you had a PR open a long time ago saying we should have a resync of all the issuers fairly regularly.
Yeah, I never got that across the line. I need to have another go at that.
Maybe we should put that in a 1.8. And as part of that, we could then go and look at the health checks for each of our own built issuers and see whether they're actually any good.
It's like there's another PR. Josh did a PR which refactored all the issuers, and that I think that's like been twice resuscitated and we've never managed to get it merged. So yeah, perhaps that is something we should do.
Okay, so that would be like one takeaway from this. I guess we could maybe somehow try to get some more information from you, like so about the initial backup period potentially being shorter. That kind of feel like so with the exponential backup design at the moment, like I'm kind of assuming that it would be merged straight to GA, which would be then it would be nice if that did not change like down the line. So maybe we should somehow ask users whether the 1 hour period is actually, if they have like cases where 1 hour period is too long, and we could kind of build a case for whether it's worse for us to break that and make the initial backup period shorter. Which I guess could come in a form of a Slack post or.
Yeah, maybe create an issue and link to that on a Slack post and see if we can get some traction on it.
Cool. I'll do that.
Ties in looking at triage party, and the most reacted to issue is this one, which is cert-manager failing to renew certificate.
Oh, but this always is something that there are like 100 issues probably that. Yeah, exactly. This is solved. This is definitely solved. I'm sure that this is the one where.
Laugh about it. It's kind of embarrassing. We always say it's solved, but yet people keep coming back, and even James Laverack in JetStack has said he's got a problem with cert-manager, right? Not renewing a certificate.
Yeah, but this is 103, and I think that this is the this I think is the case where after it has failed once, it did not renew correctly anymore, and we fixed that I think in 1.5 or something.
I've lost track. I have to, yeah, you know more about that than I do.
But it sounds like that bug will almost always exist in every version, because the main purpose of cert-manager is to renew the certs. And there are many, many reasons why there could be a situation that it can't. So variations of this problem will always appear, right?
Well, we need a big documentation page that says,
Yeah, how to troubleshoot when
How
my
to
issue is
troubleshoot,
or my cert isn't being, yeah.
at least, and maybe a pinned issue,
Yeah, that's a good point.
pinned discussion or something.
Yeah, we should probably add that as a an action item as well.
In fact, quite a few. The top 3 reacted issues are along those lines. I can't share the link to the query, but if you go to triage party and click the reactions column,
So do we want to continue on the exponential backoff topic?
sorry, I derailed the conversation.
No worries.
Like I feel like mostly all was said. Were there any more? So I guess like after this discussion, it feels like we might want to discuss about the initial backup period a little bit and kind of gather some feedback maybe before merging this as well.
Is that configurable as a new field on the issuer or something like that?
No, there is no like that specifically is not configurable in any way. The backup
Okay.
period. It felt like it would potentially be make it too complicated. And like one of the reasons, I guess, because one of the reasons why we wanted to do it was to like kind of reduce strain on external sources. We didn't necessarily want also to make it configurable.
It feels like that initial backoff period should be tied to the certificate's validity period in a more formal way. Like it would be the floor of, as in like the floor of, say, a third of the validity period and an hour. So like it's an hour at most, but otherwise it's like for a certificate which lasts for an hour, it would be 20 minutes.
Why even an hour at most?
We don't need that. We don't know that value though. The validity period. It comes from when it's signed.
We do sometimes.
We know it from status. I guess it can change because like it may be the case that user actually changed it. Well, I'm thinking about an edge case. A user changed it whilst it's failing, and then what do we do? But I guess that's like a nitpicking. We know it by looking at cert status, right? Is that not what was meant?
If I think there's cases where we can know it at the very least, right? If we can't know it, then I guess that's different. But if a cert's requested with a duration of an hour, it's clearly not correct for the initial backoff time to be an hour.
Yeah, but the spec duration can't be trusted.
But you have it on status. Like you always have the not before, not after on status. If it's ready. Yeah, if it's actually, yeah, you're right. Initially it won't be there. So if it fails from start, then yeah, that's true.
Sure, but like at the moment we're not even doing the happy case, right? Like if we succeed 7 times to renew a cert that's an hour in length, and the 8th time has a hiccup, it can never be retried to renew it before the cert expires, right? That's like this doesn't fix it for every possible case, but this does improve the most common case if someone's using a minimum length cert currently.
But I think it's just I just don't think it can be trusted. Like a certificate, like if you regularly renew a certificate, like the duration could change any time that you get back. And the requested duration is like kind of garbage in most of the cases.
Sure, but like if we already have a certificate issued that we are renewing, like if like there is a common case here where like at the moment functionally it would be a disaster for any organization to request a certificate with a lifetime of 1 hour and for us to issue it, because if something goes wrong reissuing it, they're guaranteed to have an outage because it can't renew in time, right? Like if it fails the first time.
I wonder if it would be really bad to have like initial backup flag and kind of like, I mean, this
kind of feels like this is an issuer concern, and it should be the issuer who, you know, in the same vein as like a HTTP backoff response or whatever, like it should be the issuer's responsibility to signal when it should be backing off.
The issuers, it would certainly have to be configurable per issuer. Like there's no reason for
no, I mean like in the issuer code.
Well,
like,
yeah. There's no reason for the Acme issuer when talking to Let's Encrypt to ever go below an hour as the initial backoff period. Like it just doesn't make sense given the certs that are issued are of a known duration. It's not configurable. It wouldn't make sense to have it be configurable. But if someone's using a CA issuer, like it should be configurable. Like ideally for users, they should be able to say, oh, initial backoff period's 10 minutes, and there's no reason for it not to be. But like the initial heuristic, I can't say that word, heuristic that we use for determining it, like could be better than just sort of defaulting to an hour, because if in the common case, we know how long the last cert lasted for, or we know how long it is until it expires in most cases, and at least in that path we can do better. But that's kind of a tangent to exponential backoffs, I guess, in a way.
Yeah, I feel like I think we can. I agree. We could definitely do better. We make it like an issuer concern, and the issuer can signal when it should be tried again, like a seed value or something for some kind of exponential backoff. Like you say, Acme. We could make probably some like good guesses there. I think in the Acme spec it says something about backoff, or Let's Encrypt gives you some values maybe.
They send like retry headers, but that's just Let's Encrypt, not the other Acme.
And like the CA issuer, we can calculate that value quite well, but that would never fail. But like Vault, we could probably infer like a good value from that. TPP, we might want to be a bit kinder. Google Cloud, we could probably be quite aggressive with that retry value, because we can assume that Google can handle lots of requests from us.
I think usually when you're working with exponential backoff and retry libraries for your HTTP or gRPC clients, you configure 3 values. So initial backoff time, and then the time that you're exponentially increasing on the window between retries, but then also the maximum time after which you're going to stop retrying. So I think in that case, you would add those 3 values to the issuers that would support it, right? In this case, not Acme, for example.
Yeah.
And then that would give the user, and then you could have, I guess, default values for those built in to the code.
But we don't control all issuers. There are external issuers.
Right. That's true.
Yeah, this could be like a best effort thing. I don't know. So, yeah,
I feel like, I don't know, like I kind of feel like that will add more complexity and kind of make it.
I agree. I don't think it should be in the same topic as exponential backoff. I think it's easier to reason about it if it's separate from that current pull request that we have. Because it sounds like it's a way bigger discussion and has more effects than this has for Acme. I mean, the reason we created this one is because Acme told us that we're hammering their API with too many requests, right?
Yes, it was one of the reasons. And also the cases where people exceed their own rate limits quite easily.
Yeah. So if we want to solve for that first, and then does it make sense to open an issue on the initial backoff period and start from that end to discuss? We don't have a lot of time left today, so if we want to talk about the 1.7, we should try to do that.
Yeah, I can open an issue for that. Makes sense.
All right. Anything else on that topic before we change? Cool. I also want to add a disclaimer and a clarification. We said 1.8, we're not committing any features to any version releases in the future. So from this point on, it means that we're talking about future versions, and this is also about what we're working on next, not necessarily what will be ready for 1.8. I just wanted to make that clear for any viewers of this recording. Cool. Do we want to swing back to 1.7? What's the status?
Looks like Mail has hit a roadblock with the 1.5 release.
Yes, sorry. The CMCTL artifact wasn't created. I guess I don't know.
I don't think we were making. I don't think CMCTL existed in 1.5. Or did it?
So would we have to check out a previous version of the release repo?
You check out the version that
Yes,
What that
resmart.
that existed when we released 1.5.
Yeah, exactly. That's what I'm going to do. Thanks.
We don't. This is it's kind of highlighting a process problem where we say we support 2 releases back, but we never really do unless something terrible has happened, which means that we then need to
Yes.
go and work out how to release the old version.
Yes.
It makes the case for version releases of CMRL as well, doesn't it?
It's and the job config. We should have a 1.5 job config and a 1.6 job config. And
Yeah, I think like we'd want like a list of build targets, and like that will change over time. And I'm rambling.
This ties in pretty
Maybe
nicely.
you want to like, sorry, go on.
So this ties in pretty nicely to getting rid of Bazel, because like make will not have any of this. Like or you just run make build, and whatever was checked into the cert-manager repo at that time will be what builds it, and that will be all the commands that we ever want will be versioned with cert-manager and not with anything else. So actually, versioning CMRL is probably entirely pointless because it'll just all be defined in the cert-manager repo and version there.
but it's more that if you're moving to make accidentally makes it better rather than like if we knew that this was the case or thought about it before, we could. It's not difficult to version the CMRL build jobs.
Yeah, but I'm saying there's no need for a process to do it now, really. Although tagging a known good release of CMRL for 1.5 would probably be valuable to do now, just in case. Although 1.5's support ends today, so maybe not. But for 1.6 for sure. But that should be fine.
Why are we doing 1.5 patch release? Is it just? I think maybe I know the answer. Is it so that people can upgrade through? If they're on 1.4, they have a version of 1.5 which doesn't break things for them on their path to 1.7. Right. Right.
But if they update very quick, if they if they update quickly enough, it won't break anything because there'll be nothing to renew in the very tiny period where 1.5 exists.
But you can't rely on that. No.
Right. Everybody is waiting for this 1.5 release. That's not nice.
Well, no. I
Don't
mean,
worry, don't
I can share the. I mean, I can talk for the record about what is in.
Yeah, I think that's a good idea. Yeah.
Okay, let me find the release notes. cert-manager website working? Oh yeah.
I hope so.
So here in the chat is the link to the soon to be released release notes. Yeah, so this is
screen.
Oh, I
Do you
could share
wanna
my
present
screen. I have to turn off Slack and everything. Hang on.
Joachim's on it.
So
He's
Yeah.
done it.
Oh, is he? Okay.
You're gonna have to tell me when I need to scroll, but let's see if this works.
Yeah, so the big thing to consider when you're upgrading to 1.7 is that this is the culmination of our efforts to remove some old API versions. And this started in version cert-manager release 1.5, where we deprecated API versions v1 alpha 2, v1 alpha 3, and v1 beta 1. And then in cert-manager 1.6, we took the next step, which was to configure our CRDs, configure the Kubernetes API server to not serve those versions, whilst still having the definitions of those API versions in our CRDs, so that people who had got certificates of v1 alpha 2 stored in their GitOps systems. Oh no, that's not quite right, Ober, is it? That's this was so that people who had v1 alpha 2 stored in their API servers from previous manifests that had been applied, so that the conversion webhook in cert-manager 1.6 could continue to convert them as and when those resources were modified by the administrator or by processes in the cluster. And then in 1.7, we finally removed these legacy API versions from the CRD. And that means that we've also removed the conversion webhook. It means that the CRD files themselves are like a third of the size that they used to be. But it means that before you upgrade to 1.7, if you are in the situation where you have been using cert-manager since before the release of version 1, there's a chance that you have got resources in your API server which have like legacy versions in the CRD statuses. And it's important to correct that before you upgrade. And so we have provided in 1.7 a tool, a command line tool called CMCTL upgrade, which you should run on your cluster to correct these the statuses of the CR of the custom resources which are affected by this problem. And it will tell you when it's finished, and then you can safely upgrade. And this is described in the release notes. The second important change, I'm not so well qualified to describe, so perhaps I'll hand over to Jake to describe this Ingress class problem.
Yeah, sure, I can talk about it. So this has actually been in cert-manager since, has been cert-manager since 1.5, where we changed from using the v1 beta 1 Ingress API version to the v1 Ingress version. And as part of that change, my understanding of the migration path was to move the Ingress class from an annotation to the dedicated field in the new v1 spec. But it turns out that this wasn't quite correct, because the Ingress class in v1 beta 1 was just a text string, and the Ingress class in v1 is it's an object reference to a specific Ingress class object, which is where SIG Network decided that it would be a good idea to put all of your Ingress class configuration, which is the actual problem with that is that the different Ingress controllers implemented this all in different ways. So some controllers just used it as a string and continued to work. Some, most notably Istio, would only now work if you created the corresponding Ingress class v1 resource to go with the Ingress class name field. So this means it just silently broke a lot of people because they didn't understand, and I didn't understand when I implemented it, the semantic difference between Ingress class name and the old Ingress class field. So as part of this release, we went and tested a whole bunch of Ingress controllers to try and work out what they all do. And we've come to the conclusion that the best thing to do is use the old style annotation, even on v1 ingresses, because that's the most compatible across every Ingress controller. And if there are any kind of special things that we found while testing, we included it in the upgrade guide in the cert-manager 1.7 release notes. So most people should not experience any breakage, but make sure you read the release notes.
Yeah, thanks, Jake. So those are the two key things to consider before you upgrade to this version. And then you should read the rest of the release notes, which discuss the some of the other themes of this release. You could scroll down a bit, Joachim. We've had a contribution from the community, which allows you to configure in the certificate resource the additional formats for the private key material, and how the private key of your certificate gets stored into the secret. So you can read about that. There's a new documentation section about that. Josh has finished off the feature which we started in 1.6, which allowed a user to configure particular labels and annotations which cert-manager should add to the secret that it creates or manages. We didn't know when we introduced that how to reliably remove those labels and annotations when the secret template was changed, but Josh has figured that out and solved the problem using a mechanism of the Kubernetes API server, which was introduced in Kubernetes 1.18, called server-side apply. So for that reason, this version of cert-manager, the minimum supported version of Kubernetes for cert-manager 1.7 is Kubernetes 1.18. Another new feature is that James Munnelly, the original author of cert-manager, has contributed a new feature which allows you to configure the webhook component with a configuration file, as opposed to configuring it using command line flags. And that's the first in a series of PRs that he or we are going to contribute. so that all the components can be configured using configuration files. And those configuration files are versioned and documented alongside the rest of the cert-manager APIs. That's going to be useful for people who want to deploy cert-manager with operator lifecycle manager, for example. It will allow people to deploy cert-manager using OLM, but customize the configuration of each of the components, whilst we distribute a fairly standard OLM package. And then the final point of interest is that this is in this release, Ashley has done a lot of work to make it possible to develop and work on the cert-manager code without using Bazel. The aim ultimately is that we will remove Bazel from our build system. And before we do that, we need to make sure that the alternatives are all adequate. And so we've got a make file now which works. You can use go test. You can simply use go test to run all the unit tests. And you can build the artifacts, right, Ashley, with the make file. Artifacts which are exactly match those which we built up with the CMRL release tool.
Let's not get so excited as to say they exactly match, but they match very, very closely, and they only differ where we agreed that it was fine for them to differ. And if you're using really, really weird paths manually in your deployed images and you reference something that was built by Bazel in there, you may hit an issue, but you'd have to be going way out of your way to do that. And we discussed this quite a lot and sort of decided it was pretty unusual that anyone would be doing that in the first place. But yeah, they otherwise almost entirely match. And it adds a zip file for the client binaries on Windows.
You can make that effort.
We're hoping that
there's a link to the issue, which has the umbrella issue, where it's documented all the steps that are involved in that effort.
Yep, so that's issue 4712. And we're hoping that this will also reduce the threshold for external contributors and new contributors to the code base. I think we're out of time, but that I think was the most important things from the release, unless somebody has something else they would like to add before we start wrapping up. Special shout out to our community contributors that help out with new features, bug fixes, and testing. It's extremely appreciated.
Especially Thierry Saleh, the one who did the additional formats, and Code Ranger on Slack, who always answers questions, which is much appreciated.
Yes, big shout out to you. Join us on Slack, on the CNCF Slack, right? Cert-manager channel.
Kubernetes one, not the CNCF.
Right, sorry, the Kubernetes Slack. All right, unless anyone objects, I'll stop the recording. If I can find the button to do that. Let's see how long this takes.
Come on.
There we go.